in here.
Some kids would just be crying if I did that, but he just loved it.
It's good to have you all here this morning. I told my wife if there was only 8 people, I'd be a little panicked. So we pushed past 8 people, that's good to know. My name is Todd. Oh man, coughed her up. Who needs that? It's a magic trick. Right off the start. Todd Zitlow, and I'm the archivist at Concordia Historical Institute, which is the Department of Archives and History for the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We are located on the Concordia Seminary campus, right across from the library. And you may also be aware that we have a museum that's at the national office, which is in Kirkwood. If you've ever been to the national office down in Kirkwood, the museum there is also the responsibility of Concordia Historical Institute. We'd be glad to have you visit either of our 2 locations at any time for a chance to learn about history or to just say hi or bring a donation, you know, whatever you want to do. Okay, for the last 5 weeks, we've been talking about controversies in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which had its start in 1847. Last week, we expanded that out to all the controversies throughout the history of the Synod. The first 4 weeks were on one specific controversy which happened in the 20th century, which was it's kind of in shorthand known as the walkout. It's always a struggle to name exactly how do you title a single event. The people who walked out would say they didn't walk out. They walked off, or they processed out, or something like that. In any case, it's a shorthand for all the events that happened during the last century. It really expanded maybe across 50 or 60 years. So today, the intent of today is to really kind of serve as a wrap-up to the last 5 weeks. And primarily, I wanted to make sure that we had some time for your questions. Now, I was here for the first 3 weeks, and I wrote down some questions that I heard during that time, and so I have those queued up here. And then if you have any other questions. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through a broad history of the events again, just as a refresher, because I know last week we were looking at kind of a broader picture of things, everything from the mid-1800s forward. So we'll do a quick summary today, and then and I'll get into a little more detail to just pinpoint a few things that I'm not sure were always mentioned during the presentations. Pastor Weinhold really was focused on his experiences as a student during that time, and so I want to press that back a little bit further to some of the events that were leading up to it and some of the context that was happening at that time. So I don't know how many here have ever made pancakes. Okay, that's what I figured. We'd get a lot of pancake makers. So that's my expertise, pancakes at the house. And I think there's maybe 6 or 7 ingredients that go into making pancakes at our house. And I would guess that your recipes are somewhat similar to that. There's only a certain range of ingredients that can go into a recipe to make pancakes. Now, there's some room, right? There's some room for changes here and there. You can put a little more flour in, maybe a little more milk or an egg, maybe no egg, whatever. Maybe just the egg white, whatever. And you're still going to get pancakes. But if you were to reverse the amount of flour with the amount of salt, you wouldn't get pancakes. And it wouldn't be very edible, and it wouldn't bring any energy and life to your body. Well, that's kind of the frame I want to use for the events that we're talking about here. This has been going on since the beginning of Christianity and before with Judaism, is, well, what really constitutes the proper understanding or the perimeter of the church, you know, and proper belief. And so that's kind of what was at debate here, is, well, what things can we say are okay and be included still in a proper understanding of Christianity, and what things go too far? Because eventually the recipe gets too far away. You know, and I know there's a lot of honest opinions about it, and in America and in the world today after the Reformation, there's a lot of fractured nature to Christianity. So there's a lot of ways that people articulate Christianity, and many, if not most of them, are properly considered within the Christian community. But there would be certain anchor points that probably have to be in there, have to be in that recipe for it to be considered proper Christianity, and there'll be other things that aren't. And eventually, if you get too much salt and not enough flour, it's not going to be edible anymore, and it's not going to feed your soul, and it's not going to be life-giving to the people who eat it. And so, I know I don't like controversies all that much. I really kind of would rather there were no controversies in the church. But it is true that at some point the recipe just gets too far away. And it's no longer serving the needs and the people, and it's certainly not accessing the truth any longer. So, just as a broad picture of things, I mean, there really was content that was at stake during these debates. And it was kind of, what is the nature of Christianity? What is allowed within the bounds of Christianity? And in some sense, narrower, what was allowed in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which has its own history and its own roots. Okay, went too far. Okay, so a quick summary of the events that we've talked about here. And I put up here a B+, because I'm not a PhD student, so you're not getting the A work today. You're just getting a B+. So, but we have some good scholars out there who are writing some things. And if anybody knows Dr. Larry Rast, he's the emeritus president of Concordia Seminary in Fort Wayne. He's putting together a chronological history of the walkout, which will probably be, I would certainly think it would be, the most important work that will be done on the walkout. He's a top scholar, and he will be putting together a chronological history with all that is involved in that. We've already produced a book on kind of the doctrinal questions, and I have that up here, and it is available through CHI or after this morning if anybody's interested in kind of pursuing this a little more. So that's kind of the doctrinal content. Dr. Rast will come later and be more chronological. Okay, but this is a broad picture of it. So you may be surprised I go all the way back to 1924 here, and then come up to the walkout, which actually, I mean, this is an artificial ending point too, because the controversy really lasted all the way to 1990 in some sense. But I'm going to go back to 24. So there was already some pushback happening in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and I know not everybody here probably has roots in the LCMS. I actually don't. Mine were in the Wisconsin Synod. Okay, but so in 1924, Pieper, who was the president of Concordia Seminary, wrote a 3-volume set of dogmatics that became the centerpiece of the study of doctrine at the seminary from that point forward. Now, there were some at that time who were already concerned with kind of the character of the dogmatics, and they felt like Christianity was becoming too intellectual or too staid, boring. It wasn't enough focus on the life of the Christian. That as long as you had the right ideas, it didn't matter if you took care of your neighbor, which is, of course, I'm sure even people would say that's not true. But there was some pushback already in that time frame where you're getting kind of two families of kind of concepts within the synod. One where you want to focus more on an active Christianity, and one which is concerned with a proper understanding of Christianity. Well, that kind of was in the background for a while, and then probably was brought much more to its fullest expression in 48-49. Of course, what happened in that time frame? It was the end of World War II. Well, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and I can speak to this because I've seen thousands of boxes, has a long history of really caring for its neighbor. I mean, and this goes way back. So, and Pastor Banger, who was one of the original people in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, started a hospital and an orphanage, which is in St. Paul de Pere now, and things like that. So from the very beginning, the Synod has had a history of caring for people. So at the end of World War II, Synod said, we want to help our fellow German peoples back in Germany. After all this devastation that was wrought on their country, all the bombing, the cities that were destroyed, we want to both, as pastors, as theologians, and as neighbors, go to Germany and provide whatever support we can to the people in Germany. And so they set up these conferences that were with pastoral leadership in Germany, and they were in a town called Bad Boll, and so they're called the Bad Boll Conferences. Well, it is a popular opinion today that what happened, well, I'll move on. I got a little more detail on that later. But anyway, so this is where there was some mixing of theology. German theology with the current expression of theology in America, and there was some mixing of that, and that heavily influenced the people in the Missouri Synod who came back to America. And that really was the kickoff to a different understanding of Christianity and the church. Okay, in 1958, had another high point here. There was a paper written by Dr. Charlemagne, who was a professor at the Concordia Seminary, a truly top-level scholar, and to say the least, he set off a bit of a firestorm with what he wrote in this paper in 1958, and I'll show you that in a second. All right, in 1962, the president at the time of the synod was Benken. Benken. And he was a kind of an anchored Missouri Synod guy. He didn't want to be pushing too far into any kind of more liberal ideas or anything. So he was kind of a historic anchored Missouri Synod president. In '62, Oliver Harms was elected to presidency. And Harms was a much more middle-of-the-road guy. In fact, I think if a final analysis of his life would show he was much more supportive of the liberal position than even a middling one. But in any case, he didn't do much. He kind of just kept kicking the ball down the road and wasn't really being very confrontational with the faculty at Concordia Seminary. And so the teachings that were starting to develop within the seminary community weren't being challenged either by the seminary community or at the top level of synod in a way that the real conservative folks thought they should be. And so later on, that pushes the synod, the conservative movement, more to want to change that. And in '69, they choose to elect Preuss. They get motivated and organized and elect someone who's back more in the center of historic LCMS history. In between there, I just want to mention this, Christian News. If you can see this on the picture, it actually says Lutheran News. I don't know if anyone remembers, but it actually started as Lutheran News. Some of you maybe know this, but I know some of you parents out there, if you've had kids in cross country, you've actually been on the property where this is produced. This is where the state cross country championships are run at Camp Trinity. And that's where this newspaper is produced. And Herman Otten was a pastor out there, and he would agree he was a thorn in the flesh of the synod, and he probably would be glad about that. So in the early '60s, he was a student at the seminary, and he started seeing all kinds of things he didn't like, and he started making them public. And he wanted this news to get out to the synod, and so he developed this newspaper, Lutheran News, and it became Christian News a few years later, and he was always trying to get the information out there, what he believed was being taught at the seminary, and in what ways it was incorrect. And this became an important literature piece for spreading the information around the synod. And it's still being produced today. Pastor Otten died here just a few years ago, but it was continuing to be a piece of information today. Okay, and then that, eventually, you start more, you're getting this movement where there's the liberals are kind of, more liberal ideologies, kind of pressing in, taking a little more control, and then you're getting a pushback from the conservatives, and that results in the election of J.A.O. Preuss, who Pastor Schwab married a Preuss daughter. If you weren't aware of that, Pastor Schwab was a pastor here for a long time. His daughter was J.A.O. Preuss's daughter. His wife was his daughter. Now, along with this, Preuss was elected in the summer of 1969 to the presidency of the synod. In the early part of '69, John Teachin was elected president of the seminary. And I think there's good evidence to support that this was done intentionally. They knew that the more liberal-minded folks knew that somebody from the conservative community was probably going to win synod's presidency. They had an older president at the time, Feuerbringer, who I think he's been overlooked by and large in literature, but I think when we look back on Feuerbringer, he's going to be the guy that really organized this core of more liberal ideas, and he's the one who brought them into the seminary. He formed the faculty, he allowed it to go on, and a lot of the writings I've seen of his, he's always just kind of obfuscating. Oh, no, there's no problem here. No, it's all good, I checked. There's nothing going on here, or whatever. And they say, well, send me a report. He said, oh, here's the report. Nothing's going on here. It's okay. Everything. Now, that's what I've seen. I mean, I've seen writings of his that are like that. I'm not trying to badmouth the guy or whatever. But I think that that's probably going to be the case when scholars look at it. So in the end of '68, he's like, I'm kind of old. I want to get a new guy with new blood in here. He retires early before the '69 presidential election so they can get a new president in at the seminary. And they do that in the spring of '69, and that's John Teachin. And of course, then it really kicks into high gear. Preuss sets up his investigation and starts pressing the faculty more, looking into it in a more detailed way. He starts getting more people on the committees he needs to have people on in order to do the things he wants to do. And, so people will say, well, Preuss was a political animal mostly, which incidentally, these guys are all pretty big-time people. J.O. Preuss's dad was the governor of Minnesota. So these are people who were well-connected, and the theologians at the seminary were among the most respected theologians around the world even. So these were people who probably in many cases, and Dr. Scharnhorst was the first chaplain in the military to achieve the rank of brigadier general. So these were guys at the top of their expertise, the top of their professions, and they probably had some ego to go along with that, And so, yes, okay, people say this was about egos, this was about politics. Yes, but it really, really was about the recipe that defines Christianity and how, what are the perimeters around Christianity. I mean, we would say, if you're not Trinitarian, okay, that's probably not Christian anymore. If you don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus as a real historical fact, okay, that's probably not core Christianity anymore. So there are core things that you just kind of, for most people, would say you have to have that as a part of Christianity. Even the Apostle Paul said, if Christ wasn't raised from the dead, we need to be pitied. Okay, if this isn't a real fact, and these are the facts that were being challenged by some of the faculty at Concordia Seminary, was whether the resurrection needed to be or was a historic fact. Okay, well, this is challenging the notion of Christianity, okay? It's whether you are sympathetic to that view or you're more sympathetic to the conservative view, these are very important distinctions about the nature of Christianity, and it's probably important for them to be decided, right? And to have there be a clear message. I mean, in today's news, you're probably aware of the Methodists. They're having a strong, struggle. This kind of struggle didn't just happen in Lutheranism. In fact, in the LCMS, it came late. A lot of these debates happened in other denominations around the world before it got to the LCMS. And they played out very differently in most cases. So this was very common. This question was not just a Lutheran question. This was a question for all of Christendom and continues to be relevant today. Okay, and then that eventually leads to the walkout here in 1974, which has all other consequences. Okay, keep moving here. I'm not going to have any time for questions. Okay, here we go. Another B-plus summary of the events outside. I think it's also important to keep in mind that the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age that was going on around the world and in America during the same time frame, okay? Because the students at the seminary definitely were intellectually involved in some of these concepts, and some of these issues were at the forefront of their thinking while they were at the seminary and before and after. Okay, you see here, 1910 was this event happened in Scotland, the World Missionary Conference, and this really was the foundation to a movement called ecumenism. Ecumenism believes that the greatest sin that the church is engaged in is the fractured nature of Christianity. That as long as we remain fractured into all of our little groups, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Lutherans, the Episcopalians, the Catholics, as long as we remain fractured, we are damaging our witness to the world. Okay, that the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ cannot go out in its fullest extent because the world looks at us and they say, well, you're all broken up. I'm not going to follow you guys. You're all fractured. And this was a very central belief among in the world today. I mean, during this time frame, the Christianity during this time frame was this idea that we have to bring Christianity back together under a single umbrella. And it really had its impetus there in 1910 at the World Missionary Conference. Because in the missionary circles, you're out there and you're among non-Christians, right? And by and large, missionary activity happens where there's no Christians around. And so who do you lean on for prayer support, for encouragement? Well, other missionaries from other denominations. So they're working together to proclaim the gospel in areas where Christianity doesn't exist. And so there's a natural impulse among missionaries often to kind of work together with other Christians that are right in their area, right? I mean, it'd be like if you're a strong Missourian and you go to New York and you see another Missourian, you say, hey, there's another Missourian or whatever, or a St. Louis City FC fan or whatever, who blues, yeah, 9 in a row, whoa. Okay, so, and you have these connections. And it's just, you just do that. When you travel around, you find connections to people who have something in common to you. Okay, so, but they started articulating this idea that we need to reunify all of Christendom. Okay, and this bled across from missionary activity into all of theology at the time. Eventually, it bleeds across. Okay, you have World War I, of course, and then World War II, and then we get to this World Council of Churches. So this is another effort on the part of the Christian community around the world to reunify, to begin working together in ways that are more unified just unified. Okay, and if you remember, I put on here 48, 49 for the Bad Bull conferences that the Missouri Synod was at. And so this is all happening kind of at the same time, right? This idea that we want to pull Christianity back into one unified whole. Okay, and then also in the environment around us, we have the civil rights movement happening in the United States, which was not always very smooth. Lots of controversies, lots of disagreements, rioting and things like that. It was very up and down in terms of the peaceful nature of that. And then you have 62, 65, you have the Second Vatican Council of the Catholic Church. And one of, if not the primary goal of the outcome of the Second Vatican Council was ecumenism. This idea of bringing Christianity back together under one umbrella. And so, as the largest group of Christians in the world, Roman Catholics are going to have a significant influence over the direction of the conversation among Christians around the world. And so you have a strong element of this ecumenistic ideas that are now really flowing around all of Christianity. And you see we're getting close now to the events of the walkout. So this is part of the context. Okay, then you talk, again, with the students, you have the assassination of Martin Luther King, you have the assassination of Robert Kennedy, that happens is either that year or the next year. And then in 1970, you have the shooting of Kent State. Here's the classic picture, if you can see it on there in the bottom right. Classic picture of one of the students who was killed at Kent State. Some of you can remember these events. I was alive, I don't remember them. But this is the arena in which these young students are growing up in. Okay, as they went through high school in the 60s and they went to college in the late 60s. And these are the things that they are seeing, and they are seeing these as really bad events, which they are, really bad events. And so there's this kind of impetus for protesting, which is just in the water. Students are doing walkouts, they're doing sit-ins, they're doing all kinds of protests against the Vietnam War, against civil rights abuses, against what they perceive as the abuse of the power of government, say at Kent State. So the idea of a walkout was just what you did as students in the late 60s and early 70s, right? And there were things that were worth protesting probably, I mean, there were things to be upset about in any case. There were troubling times and very unsettled. I mean, there's still unsettled things today. So this is kind of in the background, right? You have this broad movement of ecumenism that's happening across Christianity. That's influencing the guys in the Missouri Synod. You got this broad movement of kind of protest and resistance to things that are happening by larger entities. So there's a pushback against kind of the controlling bodies. And that is also in the air of the events around the walkout. And the exact amount of influence and role those will play, I'll leave to the people who write the A+ sums. Okay, real quickly, hopefully I can get through some of these. I want to just talk a little more in detail about some of the 8 things I put up there for the Synod's history. This is a copy of Pieper's Dogmatics. And some of the language that came out of the walkout movement was they changed nouns into verbs, right? They didn't want the church to be a noun church, a confessional church or something like that, it's just to confess. They wanted it active, so they put confessing. Okay, that you are supposed to be in the activity of doing church, not just sitting around and being a church. You have to be doing something for you to be properly Christian. And this is one of the ways in which this started, this idea that Pieper's Dogmatics was just a way of being church, and he wasn't really concerned with doing anything in your life that supports or activates Christianity. Remember, that goes back to the 1920s. Okay, here's the summary of the events in Bad Bull. So the question then becomes, initially their impetus was aid going towards Germany. We wanted to help people in Germany recover from the war. But there's a popular opinion now that it really ended up being theology going toward America. Okay, so our theologians, our pastors, our leaders went over to Germany, met with the German theologians. They interacted with the German theology of the time, found it interesting, found it invigorating, found it intellectually well established, and they thought, oh, I think we need to start doing some of this stuff. And so, of course, the difficulty is that the German theology grew out of the war context, and World War I, and the Depression, and Hitler, and all that, and I'm not sure that that means that it actually can be applied directly across to the United States, but many of the important people who went over there were heavily influenced by the theology they were hearing from the German counterparts at these conferences. And so they're taking it on board, they're bringing it back to the United States and to the St. Louis Seminary. Okay, this is the word, maybe I'll skip this word a little bit, but the historical critical method is another one of these big debate topics that was a part of this, and it's how do you interpret the scriptures. I think Pastor Weinhold talked about this a little bit. But this is the paper that Dr. Scharlemann presented in 1958. If you can read the first line or two, anything give you any trouble there? The book of God's truth. I propose in this paper to defend the paradox that the book of God's truth contains errors. What is more, I hope to show that by the proper resolution of this paradox, we in fact magnify the truth that comes to us by divine revelation. This was an exploratory paper. He wrote this for the faculty, and then he presented it at the Northern Illinois, I'm pretty sure this is the right one, at the Northern Illinois Pastoral Conference, the district conference in Northern Illinois. This got people's attention, right? I mean, wait a minute. You're saying the Bible, the book of God's truth, the Bible, has errors in it? What are we talking about here? What kind of errors? How far do those errors go? How do you know which ones are errors and which ones aren't errors? Now, I worked through every single box of Dr. Scharlemann's papers. Don't do it. I wouldn't do that if I were you. And he certainly was convinced in his life that he wasn't saying anything wrong here. Now this kicked off the major pushback, right? I mean, this is way over the line for most people in the Synod. The book of God's truth contains errors. Now his argument, and I'm not smart enough to really understand everything Scharlemann was saying, but one of his points was to say the idea of inerrancy, the idea of kind of perfect scientific understanding of things is a modern idea, and it isn't properly applied to the scriptures. Okay, the scriptures is a human document written by God, inspired through man, to write this document, but it has the same limitations of any language that we use, okay? So it's not like it can have the scientific precision of a scientific project or a measurement or something like that. So there's some nuance to what he was trying to get at here. He was just saying, I don't like the word inerrant because he felt it was a modern word being tied to Scripture, which he just thought was not helpful. Of course, you can't get around this. This is pretty straightforward, that he's saying it's got errors in it. And so there was a big pushback. He was brought up on charges and things like that. And eventually, in the 59 convention here the 59 convention in San Francisco. No, wait a minute. So I think it must have gotten its B+, remember? B+. So I think though it's 62. In 62, when he went, the convention was in Cleveland. This must have come up at the 59 convention, but I think it was in Cleveland when he would apologize and withdrew. But in any case, either 59 or 62, Scharlemann in front of the convention, national convention, gets up and apologizes, withdraws his paper. It was exploratory to begin with, if you remember. He was just exploring this idea. He felt like this question that was confronting Christianity needed to be addressed, and he was just confident in himself enough to volunteer. And so he tried to start out approaching that, right? It was an honest thing. It is a question that had to be addressed because this was tearing apart other denominations. I'm just not sure that first sentence, nobody could get past it, right? It didn't matter what he said the rest of the whole paper. That first sentence was too much. So he withdrew his paper, he apologized to the convention. To keep in mind here, Charlemagne did not walk out. Charlemagne was one of the 5 guys that stayed. So, you know, the question of, well, will the real Dr. Charlemagne please stand up? If you're old enough to remember that. You know, is an open question for a lot of people. Well, wait a minute, Charlemagne was leading the charge here. Charlemagne was the one that was saying we need to criticize the scriptures and take it in its historical context and whatever. And then he doesn't leave. And so those who walked out were pretty upset at Dr. Charlemagne. And they would say, well, he wanted to be the president of the seminary. Well, there's all kinds of evidence in his papers that he wanted to be the president of the seminary. And that Dr. Teachin got elected instead. So, I mean, you're going to have to do your own work, you know, or wait till a theologian does the work on a historian or whatever. But there certainly is evidence that Charlemagne wanted the presidency, and that the idea was that all of a sudden he decided he was going to be conservative because he was going to push against Dr. Teachin. Now, I think it's probably more true that Charlemagne was more concerned about kind of what came along with this more open approach to scriptures. He was a chaplain. He was in country in World War II, in Italy. The guy was a flat-out genius. When he was in Italy, in like 44, I think he was in Italy, with the troops as they were moving up the booth there. And he was behind the lines, so he was a part of the burial of, you know, hundreds of people. He ran into a group of people, and this is a quick aside, hopefully, oh man, we only have 15 minutes for any of the questions yet. So he ran into a group of people called the Waldensians, who were a reformed group kind of before Luther, and they still exist. Anyway, he learned Italian in a week and started preaching and writing full sermons in Italian in a week. And we have a whole year of sermons in his papers written in Italian. The guy was a genius. He was a flat-out genius. And obviously a good leader, and he eventually moved his way all the way up to the brigadier general in the military. And he was the head of the graduate school at Concordia Seminary. So he's a complicated guy, I think. He wanted to address this issue. He was concerned with the pushback against the military in Vietnam and all that stuff, and the crazy stuff some of the crazy stuff that was happening at the seminary. But in any case, he withdraws his paper. Got to move along here. Okay. All right. And there's 62. Arms is elected. We talked about that already. 65, we got this, the promotion of Lutheran News, and the word is starting to get out to the lay people, okay? The people who aren't just reading doctrinal papers are aware of this, but now this is getting out to the laity. This is getting out to the masses of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the 2-3 million people, and a lot of Midwestern American Lutherans are saying, wait a minute, this is not our church. This is not what we signed up for. This does not fit within the parameters of what we think Christianity is for. In 69, you get the election of J.O. Preuss in Denver. They do approve this fellowship with the ALC, which is kind of like the opposite side of electing Preuss, right? They approved fellowship with a more liberal group, and then they elect a conservative president. Both happened at the same convention. Okay, this was one of the guys that was probably the single most radical guy that was on the seminary at this time, Norman Havel. So he wrote this in 16. This is a little memoir of his. So in 2016, this is 40 years after the walkout. The guy's lived a whole life. What does he put on the cover of his memoir? The walkout. The procession leaving the Concordia Seminary campus. This is how much these ideas lingered in the minds of the people that were there. This is how strongly they believed it. Now, let me just read a little bit about who this Norman Havel is. This is his own book, right? He put this on the back. These are things he wanted to be written. Norm Havel is an Australian, an Earth child, and a Lutheran who has survived accusations of heresy many times in his life. Heresy. Now, for me, I don't see how you can be an Earth child and a Lutheran in the same sentence, right? I can't see that. But in his mind, that's a perfectly legitimate thing to say. So, and he says in here, Memoirs of a Heretic, right? This is the subtitle, Memoirs of a Heretic. So, and now granted, he was, he's not the best example because he was probably the most radical guy that was a part of the faculty during this time. But this just shows you the extent to which some of the ideas that were happening on the campus. Okay, and so one of the questions that I'm not going to get to, there's no way. One of the questions that gets asked is how many professors actually believed false doctrine? Well, the question's never answered, right? Because they all leave, they never go through any process of critique that gets to a conclusion. The conclusion just happens because they all leave. So probably the vast majority would have been fine. Probably the vast majority of faculty that were on the Concordia Seminary campus would have been retained and continued to teach. The difficulty comes is when John Teachin was allowing guys like this to still hold positions and have influence over the pastors that were being generated and sent out to the church. Okay, and that in the end is the charge that sticks to John Teachin and gets him removed from office, is that he failed in his leadership responsibilities of overseeing the faculty. And I think there's no question that that's what happened, because there clearly was a distinction and a debate happening within the faculty between two huge groups of thought. And John Teachin kept saying on and on again, nothing's going on here. There's no difficulties. And the 5 faculty finally said, no, we completely disagree with what's happening on the campus. And they get their word out. And so eventually the synod says, well, we don't trust what John Teachin is telling us. It's his job to work through this with his faculty. He's in charge of the campus. He should be working through these theological issues with his faculty. He keeps saying nothing's going on. Well, then we got to step in and find out what's going on. So, there certainly would have been a handful of guys that would have said, no, thanks. You go, if you want to go and form your own churches or serve in whatever way you wish, but not here in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and not at our seminary. But the vast majority, I think, would have been largely within Orthodox Christianity and Orthodox Lutheranism. Okay, moving on. But I just want to give you that picture of some of the material that was happening. My daughter liked this picture. So, yeah. All right, real quickly, we're trying to come through some of these questions. What happened to those who walked out? Okay, good question. That was, I think, in first week even. What happened to those guys? Well, Seminex, the seminary that was formed after they left Concordia Seminary of St. Louis, they formed Concordia Seminary in Exile. They wanted the name Concordia. Eventually they were forced to let that go, and they became Christ Seminary Seminex. It survived 10 years, a total of 10 years. And I have a picture of where they were housed on the next slide here, which was on Grand Avenue. So they kind of started out with this relationship with SLU and with Covenant, or maybe the one down in Webster Gardens, and a school up in Chicago. They kind of formed this partnership initially, but eventually they did have a physical building, and it still exists down on Grand Avenue by the Fox Theater down there. But 10 years. Now the issue with the people who walked out is, where do they go? They graduate and they want to be a pastor. Where do they go? What churches do they go to? In the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, you have to be properly certified by a faculty of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Seminex is not that. They can be certified by the faculty of Seminex. They're not qualified to serve in a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod congregation, according to the Constitution of the Synod. So there's no churches. They had 150 graduates going out of their seminary every year. There's no churches for them. So they try to get into, at the time, what was the ALC? They try to go to the LCA. They're like, we got our own seminary students. We're putting our own guys out in our, and in some cases, about that time was the ordination of women. They were sending women out as well. So they were doing it for their own people, right? They're not going to prioritize these guys down in St. Louis who have walked out and formed their own seminary. We're going to place our own people first. So where do these guys go? And that's another paper, if you want a good paper, right? What happened to all these guys? Many of them, I think most, ended up back in the Missouri Synod, these students that graduated. My vicarage supervisor walked out. He was a fourth-year guy, he walked out. He spent his whole time in the Missouri Synod as a pastor. He got certified 2 years later. After the faculty moved from Springfield up to Fort Wayne, he presented himself to the Fort Wayne faculty and was certified and placed in the Missouri Synod. I think that's probably some kind of story like that happened to many of these guys. Okay, but there wasn't many, all of them, and so they tried to force their way into pastorates around Synod by bypassing Synod's procedures and getting district presidents to okay it. So they had 8 district presidents who were okay with placing Seminex graduates, and they started doing it in conflict to J.O. Preuss's and the orders of the Constitution of the Missouri Synod. Those presidents then of those 8 districts were brought up with charges. 4 backed off, 4 stayed true, they were fired, and eventually that path to serving in pastorates was blocked. So the story of where all these guys ended up is an open question, I would say. Many of them ended up back in the Missouri Synod, that'd be my contention based on what I've seen. And some eventually found their way into what eventually became what is today the ELCA. Okay? But it is an open question. Okay, where did the 7X faculty, where did they meet? Okay, well, I'm going to quick show you this. This is a product from their school there, and this is the building. If you drive down Grand Avenue, you can still see this down there. And they had, I think, 4 floors or 5 floors, like 9 to 15, or I'm not exactly sure the numbers of the floors. But they had the upper areas where they set up their seminary. They had a chapel in there, they had an organ, they had classrooms, offices, all kinds of stuff that was down there. Okay, and this took a little bit of time because it all takes money, right? What else? Okay, I'm going to want to touch on where did the 7X faculty go. I think Pastor Weingold said that they went to Chicago. Well, that was partially true, but they actually broke up and went multiple places, the faculty, because there was like 35, 40 faculty. They couldn't all go up to the seminary that was in Chicago. It was too many. So some went out to California, California Lutheran University. Some went to there's a Lutheran seminary down in Texas. Some went to Wartburg Seminary. Some went to Chicago. So they kind of were broken apart and were filtered into the organization that eventually became the ELCA, which happened in 1988. So the Walk West 74, they're trying to do this ecumenical thing, right? They want to reunite everybody. And so there's this movement in Lutheranism to unite everybody, which eventually becomes the ELCA. They want this. They form their own little breakoff group, and they join this movement to form the ELCA. And eventually they kind of all, the faculty at least, end up in the ELCA. All right. Here's another example of some of the things that were going on the seminary campus. I don't want to badmouth them particularly so, but just as an example of where they were at mentally, this was among the students. Remember, you had the shooting at, the assassinations of Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. You have the shooting at Kent State. There was other students that were dying from protesting. They were holding this all-night vigil. And a couple things to notice. Joint worship, right here. This is in 1970, I think this is 71. I'm not sure. It's after Kent State anyway. Joint worship, Concordia and Fontan. So the Catholics and the Lutherans coming together for a joint worship. This is that ecumenical movement, right? They want to bring people back together. Okay, film testimony of the Winter Soldier hearings. I don't remember that, the Winter Soldier hearings. Some of you may remember. But anyway, it was, this isn't just about worshiping the God who saves us from our sins. This is the politics now is leaking in here, right? Construction of memorial crosses, letter writing campaigns to senators and our friendly president. Which I don't know if that was Nixon at the time, but that seems a little strange. Tapes of veteran testimony of the atrocities happening in Vietnam. So this is definitely drifting from whether Jesus dies for your sins or not. And this becomes, this is the active part where you're supposed to be out there living your faith for the people who are being abused, for the people who are being oppressed, for, things that are happening in society. We're supposed to be actively addressing those issues, right? And so they're doing it right here. But you can see this is the nature of the things, one of the ideas, one of the things that's happening on the seminary campus. And this did happen. This eventually did occur, this service. Now I know we're running out of time. Thought I had all kinds of time. So just wanted to quickly show you some of the images that was used by those who left and their perception of what this was doing to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. This was on one of their books. And there's a picture of the LCMS seal here, and of course it's all fractured. Well, how true did this end up being, that the synod was fractured? Another symbol they used was this one. The synod is dead. The seminary is dead. It's just a stump. We are the living root that is growing off the dead stump of the synod, and the dead stump of the seminary. Well, seminary is still here. Seminex only survived 10 years. But this is the symbol that they were using. They were the true church. They were the ones proclaiming the true gospel, and everything else was just dead Christianity. This is John Teachin's memoir. And I just noticed this preparing these slides. He's got a similar end here, And I don't know if it should read anything into this or not. I just noticed it. But there's no cross here. In this image, there's a cross. The chute leads to a cross. In John Tietjens, the chute is just a chute. I don't know if it means anything. He certainly believed that the name Lutheran should go away. He wanted the word Lutheran to go away. He wanted all of Christianity to be united. Okay, these are some of the faculty publications, and I know we're up against the time here. There's a pattern here. The first one, Concordia Theological Monthly, is the doctrinal periodical of the Concordia Seminary St. Louis faculty. The last year of its production, it changed the title page to CTM, Concordia Theological Monthly, CTM. The faculty that walked out, they create this journal, Currents in Theology and Mission, CTM. They're the true church. They're the true faculty. They're the true church. They're going to take the name that they had when they were faculty at St. Louis at 801 DeMond, and they're going to take it over. Right? This is their approach. And again, you get this stump here with the tree. So CTM, they took it over. They were the true faculty. I had an idea I was going to say it, but we're already out of time. This still exists. The CTM paper, or this journal, still exists in CTM. One of the leading doctrinal papers. The CTM went away on the Concordia Seminary campus, and now it's just Concordia Journal, and it's not monthly, it's quarterly. But in any case, this idea that some of this rhetoric that came out of the walkout is just not true. See, math teacher, I wonder there's only going to be 2 or 3 people laugh at this because you have to be a mathematician to get this joke. But anyway, my point is here that the footnote, the point is to point at the footnote here, this asterisk up here, the footnote. Any good, so anyway, the mathematic part, you can ask Mr. Matt here, this factorial right here, this is a symbol in math that means something factorial. 27 factorial is definitely not equal to 27. So it'd be millions or something. So anyway, footnote down here, not a factorial, simply used for emphasis. Okay. Let's see, yeah, the 3 people who got that. Anyway, so I knew that was going to be the case. So anyway, so the footnote. The idea is that good history, good academic history, written by a good scholar, is going to be footnoted. It's going to have a place where they got the information that they put into their argument that leads to their conclusions. Right? And all too often today, and I want to put this on Facebook like a million times a day, where's your footnote? Because people say all kinds of stuff on the internet, right? And is it true? I don't know. What's your source for your information? Where did you get that? How do you know that that's true? I mean, it's getting, it's all the time nowadays. And that's on, this isn't a one-sided thing. Everybody's out there putting stuff up on the internet saying it's true. Where's your footnote? Well, my last thought here is to say, well, the footnote is at CHI, Concordia Historical Institute. We have the footnotes, okay? We have all this stuff that people want to research. If you're interested in research topics, whether it's your genealogical history for your family, or the doctrinal content, or whatever, your congregational history, we've got stuff at CHI. Probably around 8 million documents, something like 20,000 linear feet of materials, all kinds of media, all kinds of stuff. Family histories, congregational histories, we have it at CHI. We want to see you there. Okay, very quickly, I know we're 5 minutes over. The conclusions I want to leave with you. Better have some kind of conclusions after 6 weeks. 20th century controversy in the Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod was about substantive issues. It wasn't just politics, it wasn't just personalities. There was substantive things that were being talked about that would change the nature of the church as we know it. Second, the ecumenical movement has not unified American Lutheranism. It continues to run forward full speed. The ecumenical movement continues to go forward. The ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, continues to unite with other denominations. But almost on a decade-by-decade basis, when they go more towards ecumenism, people leave the ELCA. A group left the ELCA in 1988 before they moved, before they even formed. A group left the ELCA in 1999. A group left the ELCA in 2010. So as their tent gets bigger, they're actually forcing people on conscience to leave. So it isn't really working. Ecumenism is not really working.
Just to tie into that, the Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod invited all the other Lutheran church bodies to come up with one single Lutheran hymnal. And that was the Lutheran Service Book, the Green Hymnal 1978, which the LCMS then backed out of. So that was one attempt at trying to combine all of Lutheranism, at least sharing one book.
Yeah, and it did work. It did work. We could go all day on that probably, and you would love that. You have to teach that one. Okay, all right, third one here. I know we're going way over. Those who left the LCMS did have a different vision for being and doing church. It was different. I mean, there's just no getting around it. You know, and they would say, well, it wasn't substantive. Well, it was. Fourth, the laity was crucial to the final outcome. The way synod polity is set up, the number of votes in convention, it had to have support among the laity. You folks, by and large, had to come up and say, no, this is enough. We're not going this far. Now, some are, you know, you probably got some people here who are sympathetic to the more liberal movement. That's great. There's places, you know, that you can go and find that being taught today. But in any case, in the decided outcome of the way this went, the laity was crucial in holding the line and retaining the historic position of the Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod. Remember, I'm not Missouri Synod. I was Wisconsin. Anyway, fifth one, recipe defines the dish. We're talking about that. And the vision establishes the culture. The doctrine will establish your culture of your congregation, will establish the culture of your church body. And this isn't a joke. It is, and it isn't just fluff. It gets to the core of, you see a sports team that you would really like, or a recipe. I started with the recipe because I thought that would be addressed to more people. But sports teams, the leadership matters, right? I mean, the vision they have for the team, the things they hold their team to, the standards that they provide, will result in the outcome of that team to a great extent. And that is just as true in doctrine. Okay, I'm all for a living church. Look at this church. Thousands of people come through this church. School's huge. Obviously, this is Christianity when you have living people in Christ doing things, right? You have to have it. It's not just, sitting around and saying, I believe the right things. But we can have both. We can have really good, sound doctrine, and we can have really active, faithful people who are reaching out to their neighbors and caring for people around them. We can have both, right? All right, well, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many, many blessings in our life, the many blessings that have been showered upon Zion here in Harvest Turn and around the world. And we pray that you continue to support your message, your word getting out to the people who are lost and lonely and wandering and can't make sense of this world that we live in. We pray that you bless the leadership of our church body, President Harrison, the leadership of our seminaries, and all the pastors, the students that are studying, and the pastors here at Zion as well. All this we ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. If you have additional resources, if you're interested, you have an order form that was on your information.